sense, means raising children and preparing them so that they can raise their children and so on, so that we prepare them for life. And so the loose definitions of motherhood that are in our culture really don't cut it when we come to what the Scripture teaches about motherhood. Biblically, there's so much more about motherhood that we need to know and we need to understand and we need to apply in order to have a generational impact. There's a spiritual component to motherhood that is often overlooked at best by our culture and despised and denigrated at worst by a secular world. And so we want to look at this in the generational sense. And we start back in the Old Testament, actually, if we get this concept of generations. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, it says this: "Only be careful and watch yourselves closely that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen or let them slip from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them." Psalm 78, we see this again with the concept of generations. This is just a sampling of Scripture. In Psalm 78, "O my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter hidden things, things from old, what we have heard and known and what our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children. We will tell the next generation, the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power, and the wonders He has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our forefathers to teach their children, so that the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and that they in turn would tell their children." You see, generational motherhood is more than biological. It's spiritual. The biblical concept of motherhood, and fatherhood for that matter, parenthood, has to do with passing your faith onto your children so that they in turn pass their faith onto their children, and so that they in turn will pass their faith onto their children, and so on. And helping our children know what it means to have a relationship with the God of heaven. In the end, folks, it really doesn't matter what kind of car you drove, what kind of occupation you had, where you lived, what kind of clothes you wore. It doesn't really matter in the end if you met all of your children's material needs and physical needs and emotional needs and all those other needs, financial needs. In the end, it only matters, the one thing that matters is, did you meet their spiritual needs? Did you tell them about the concepts of heaven and hell and the realities of eternity and the fact that they can have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ and know Him? That's what the Old Testament was speaking of there, all the way back in Deuteronomy. We see in this young man, Timothy, in the Scripture that we just read, a young man who had a mother and a grandmother who had a generational impact upon him, and not only upon him, but on future generations. Now you say, how are we going to have an impact upon the future generations? How can I be a generational mother? Well, there's some concepts we want to look at, and just a couple of them here. First of all, we need to understand that there are some obstacles to making this kind of impact. There are some obstacles in making this kind of impact. When we think of motherhood, and we think of parenthood in our world in the 21st century, and we think of the ideal situation, in a perfect world, we would say we would want a Christian daddy and a Christian mommy and biblical training and taking your children to church and teaching them the principles of Scripture, and that would be in a perfect world. And that's what we would want. However, we do not live in a perfect world. We live in a messed up world. We live in a flawed world. We live in a fallen world, a world of divorce and broken homes and single moms and single dads and marriages where the mom is a believer and the daddy's not a believer, or the dad's a believer and the mommy's not a believer, and all those different types of situations that have been twisted and messed up because of the sinful world in which we live. What I'm saying by that is there are obstacles. It is much easier for a mom to be a generational mother in the context of having a loving husband and father who is dedicated to Jesus Christ. It's much easier to have the nuclear family, as we call it, all together and to be that kind of generational mom. So there are some obstacles to that. It's no less true in the family that Timothy grew up in. In Acts chapter 16, in verse 1, we find that Timothy had a believing mother who was a Jew and an unbelieving father who was a Greek. And so it was a mixed marriage, and his father isn't even mentioned here. It just says that his mother Eunice and his grandmother Lois were both Christ followers. So Timothy had an unbelieving father, but he had a believing grandmother and a believing mother, and he also had a minister by the name of the Apostle Paul who touched his life in a great way and influenced him in the gospel. And so, in fact, in verse 2, Paul calls him my dear son. He was his son in the faith. He was a spiritual child of Paul's. And by the grace of God, Timothy became a man of God without the influence of a Christian daddy. By the grace of God. He had other people in his life. And so, other influences that helped him become the man that he was. And maybe you're here today and you are in, and I'm sure in a group this size even, that we would know people that are in the less than ideal situations. You're in less than ideal situations. Maybe you're a single mom, or you're a divorcee, or you're a single dad, or you have a mixed marriage, your spouse is not a believer, whatever the case may be. You see, I want to tell you this message is for you as well, because you can still be a generational parent. You can still be a generational mother in whatever circumstance you are, because this was Timothy's circumstance. It was less than ideal, but God compensated with a godly man by the name of Paul. God compensated through his godly mother and godly grandmother, and God can still use you. And maybe you're here today and you've already raised your children and you're thinking of all the mistakes and you're a prisoner of your past. You're thinking of all the mistakes that you made and all of the stumbles that you've had in parenting. And your children are all gone now and you feel like you've fallen short of what it means to be a godly mother. Maybe you weren't a believer when you were raising your children and you have many regrets about the wasted years and shortcomings. I need to tell you this morning that God can still use you to make a generational impact, even on your adult children, even on the children of this church, even on other people, as a mother and as an example at this point in your life. God can still use you. And so there are obstacles. There are obstacles to being a generational mom.